The Karath clerk who processed my entry at Vethal Oris station had 4 arms, a face like a collapsed accordion, and the kind of institutional confidence that only comes from never having been wrong yet. He scanned my transit papers, held them at a distance that suggested they smelled faintly of inconvenience, and then looked at me the way you look at a package someone has left on your desk without a return address. Independent operator, he said. Not a question, more like a diagnosis. Cargo and courier, I said. He set the papers down. He typed something. He looked at his screen, the way a person looks at a screen when the screen has confirmed what they mouthed. Already suspected. No fleet affiliation. Correct. No guild registry. Also correct. No sponsor compact. 3 for 3. He typed something else. I watched him do it. Whatever he typed took long enough that I had time to consider the ceiling panels, which were a shade of institutional gray-green that the Karath seemed to use for every surface that wasn't load-bearing. He finished typing and stamped my papers with the kind of stamp that means your file is going to the bottom of a queue and staying there. Non-essential transit user, he said. Unaffiliated. 0 institutional weight. The primary processing lanes are reserved for registered compact members. You may use Q7. Q7 was a row of seats beside a water reclamation unit that produced a faint rhythmic clicking every 40 seconds. I counted the clicks while I waited. I read a service manual I had been meaning to finish for 6 months. I ate the lunch I had packed. The 2 delegations in the primary lanes, Karath Fleet Orvith on one side, Karath Fleet Nasivar on the other, both enormous, both festooned with rank plates and protocol officers and aides whose entire job appeared to be carrying documents from one table to another, moved through their processing with the smooth, well-oiled efficiency of institutions that had been told, reliably, their whole existence, that they mattered. I watched them for a while and then went back to my manual. The dispute started around the 3rd hour. I didn't catch the beginning of it. I was on a section about coolant manifold tolerances that required my full attention. But by the time I looked it up, both delegations were on their feet. and the station's 3 senior Kareth administrators had materialized from somewhere in the back and were standing in a tight cluster with the posture of people who have just been handed a problem they did not expect before lunch. As far as I could reconstruct from the volume of official-sounding Karath that started bouncing off the gray-green walls, was a billing discrepancy over a shared corridor access relay. Fleet Orvith said Fleet Nasavar owed them 16,000 transit credits. Fleet Nasavar said they had already paid, that the payment had been misapplied, and that Fleet Orvith's accounting methodology was, and I am paraphrasing here, a creative fiction maintained for institutional convenience. Under Article 9 of the Karath Administrative Compact, disputes between member fleets of this magnitude required binding third-party arbitration before either fleet could legally depart the station. This was a rule the Compact had written specifically to prevent exactly this kind of corridor standoff from turning into something worse. It was a sensible rule. I had no objection to it. The arbitration registry was a different matter. The arbitration registry was the station's central database of credentialed third-party arbitrators, licensed, neutral, unaffiliated with any Karath member fleet. Under the neutrality clause of Article 9, anyone affiliated with a Karath Compact member was automatically disqualified from serving. The registry pulled its list from a networked certification database that was, I gathered from the increasingly tense conversation between the 3 administrators and 2 increasingly unhappy delegation heads, not currently available. Not available as in, the network node that hosted it had gone offline approximately 40 minutes ago. Not available as in, the backup node was in a maintenance window. Not available as in, the tertiary certification pathway required a manual override that needed authorization from a senior Compact administrator who was currently in transit between systems and unreachable for another 9 hours. I listened to all of this with the part of my brain that wasn't still thinking about coolant manifold tolerances. I picked up my transit papers. I walked to the front of Q7. One of the junior Kareth clerks, not the one who had processed me. This one had 6 arms and the expression of someone who had been having a bad day since approximately birth, was working through a physical backup, list of arbitration credentials. Physical as in paper, physical as in the Karath had, at some point, printed a roster, and then filed it somewhere. And someone had found it, and it was now being read out loud to the senior administrators, who were crossing names off one by one. Disqualified. Fleet affiliated. Disqualified. Currently in the outer Vethal margin. Unreachable. Retired. Deceased. I waited until there was a pause. I hold an Article 9 independent arbitration license, I said. Current. The six-armed clerk looked at me. The three senior administrators looked at me. The two delegation heads looked at me. The various protocol officers and document carriers looked at me, which was a lot of looking. One of the administrators said, unaffiliated. Yes, I said. That's the relevant part. There was a silence that had some texture to it. My Article 9 independent arbitration license was not expensive. I had picked it up during a particularly slow quarter 3 years ago, because, occasionally, not often, maybe twice a year, a cargo dispute in a small transit hub will resolve faster if someone in the room can sign off on a binding finding rather than waiting for a certified arbitrator to make it out to wherever you've ended up. It takes a 3-day course and an exam that isn't difficult if you've spent any time reading transit compact law, which I had, because I find it interesting in the same way some people find weather systems interesting. I was, as it happened, the only person in the Vethal-Oris corridor with a current, valid, Article 9 independent arbitration license who was not affiliated with a Karath compact member. The six-armed clerk verified this against the physical backup list, then against my transit documents. Then, when the network came back up 90 minutes later, against the central certification database, which confirmed what the documents said. I ran the arbitration proceeding in the station's secondary conference room. Both delegations sent representatives. I reviewed the billing records. The payment had been made and misapplied. Fleet Nasavar was correct on the underlying dispute. But Fleet Orvith was correct, that a procedural error on Nasavar's side had contributed to the confusion, which meant the resolution was a split finding, with a reconciliation schedule and a small administrative fee assessed to both parties. Neither delegation was happy, which is usually how you know an arbitration went correctly. I filed the resolution, collected my standard fee, which was, relative to the 16,000 credits at the center of the dispute, a number that made one of the protocol officers make a sound I can only describe as involuntary, and went back to Q7 to get my departure clearance stamped. The clerk who had processed me on the way in stamped it without comment. Then he pulled up my file. Then he typed something. I did not ask what he typed. My clearance was stamped. From a contact at the Compact's registry office, that the notation on my file had been amended. Zero institutional weight had been replaced with something that translated, roughly, as independent operator, arbitration credentials, Article 9 compliant, expedite queue assignment. Both fleets were held up in reconciliation paperwork for another 6 hours. I had a good tailwind through the corridor, delivered my cargo on schedule, and picked up a return contract before either of them filed their departure clearance. Unaffiliated has its advantages. I've always thought so.